Hello and welcome to Bald Spot Math. Today we're going to be talking about rectangles and squares, and more specifically how we can find area for rectangles and squares. Let's take a look. Alright, so if you've got a grid, and as usual there's a couple ways to do this, but if you've got a grid, you can literally count the number of squares inside the grid because we measure area in square units. So let's take a look at a rectangle I've got here. And I don't really recommend this method, but you can do it, and you literally just count how many squares. And if you were to do that, you would see that there are 70 squares inside covering the area of that rectangle. So what is the area? 70 square units. However, there's a better way to do this. Okay. So we can use a formula, and there's a couple different versions of this formula. And here's how that works. We're going to call this the base. We're going to call this the height, going vertically, the base going horizontally. And again, we know this is 14 because we can count. We can really assign it anything we want. I could have said that this is 34. I could have said that this was 15. Just as long as they have some kind of measurement. For today's purposes, I'm just going to use 14 and 5 corresponding to the grid again. So once I know that the base is 14, I know that the height is 15, there's a very basic formula for the area of rectangles. And that is area of a rectangle equals base times height. So we simply multiply the two measurements together and we get 70. Now there is yet another version of this formula, and it's probably in some ways a little more common, and that, as you may already know, is area equals length times width. All right? Oftentimes I'm asked, well, which one's length and which one's width? In a lot of ways it doesn't matter, but if you're really concerned about it, I always tell them length you can think of as the longest side of the rectangle, and then choose the other one for width. All right? Area equals base times height. Area equals length times width. Let's take a look at how this might differ for a square, which, as you know, a square is another rectangle. It's another type of rectangle. Okay, so again, a couple of different methods for this. We can do the counting of the squares. We can use base times height or length times width because a square is another kind of rectangle. So we can use all the methods we already know for finding the area of rectangles. However, squares are a little bit different in the fact that they have all equal sides. So there is yet another formula, and that formula is area equals s squared or side squared. So we know the dimensions of all the sides are the same. We know that we just need to multiply two dimensions together. If they're the same, it's side squared. We plug in what we know. A equals side squared. The side equals 6. 6 squared is the same as 6 times 6. Of course, you should know that by now. And that's 36 square units. If you don't understand how exponents work, take a look back on my wiki at some other videos asking class. Alright, so tips for success. We've talked about this for a lot of problem solving and even outside of math. These are always good ideas. To write down what you know, including a formula if you've got one. You won't always have one. Today's lesson we did. Plug in what you know or substitute what you know and then solve for what you don't know. And that's exactly what we did today. Let's take a look at another example. The area of my garage is 42 feet squared. That's a pretty small garage. If my garage is 6 feet wide, how long is the garage? So we're going to write down our formula, base times height. Again, we could have used area equals length times width. We know the area is 42. We know one of the dimensions is 6, so we're left with 42 equals 6 times 8. We've plugged in what we know. Now we're going to use our solving techniques for one variable, one-step equations to solve for this. We're going to divide both sides because you do the inverse operation and use the same number on both sides, and what you're left with is that my garage is 7 feet long. That's it for today, squares and rectangles.